Story 1. The Old Factory. I was 16 when my friends dared me to sneak into the abandoned steel factory outside town. The place had been shut down since the late 70s after a fatal accident. Rusted machinery still stood like skeletons frozen in time. The silence inside was heavier than the walls themselves. As I moved deeper, I heard metal scraping against the floor. I froze, convinced it was just a rat. But when I looked, I saw boot prints forming in the dust, fresh and leading further inside. My stomach dropped instantly. I followed the prints cautiously until they stopped at a giant furnace. The air smelled burnt and sour, though nothing burned. Then I saw the words carved into the metal, "I never left." When I turned to run, a man's whisper came from behind me, asking if I wanted to join the fire. No one believed me, but I'll never forget the sound of him breathing in my ear. Story 2. The tunnel beneath the school. Our high school had a rumor about tunnels beneath it, built during the Cold War. One night, me and two friends found an unlocked maintenance hatch. With flashlights, we descended into the darkness. The air was stale, thick, and carried a metallic stench. The tunnel stretched further than expected, with old signs warning of radiation. Pipes lined the walls, dripping condensation that echoed like footsteps. Our laughter died quickly. At a dead end, there was a door with deep scratches and dents on the inside, as if someone had desperately tried to get out. Suddenly, we heard banging, slow and rhythmic, from behind it. We sprinted out, and when we returned the next day, the hatch had been welded shut. No teacher ever admitted it existed, but we know what we heard that night. Story 3. The Cabin in the Woods. I was hiking in the Appalachians when I stumbled upon a rotting wooden cabin, not marked on any map. Its windows were boarded, but the door hung open slightly. Against my better judgment, I entered. Inside, the smell of decay was overwhelming. Jars lined the shelves filled with cloudy liquid and things floating inside. One jar contained what looked like a severed hand. My legs nearly gave out. In the back room, there was a mattress covered in dark stains. Scraps of newspaper wallpapered the wall, all with headlines about missing hikers. Every missing person's face had been scratched out violently. As I turned to leave, I heard a shuffle from under the mattress. Something was hiding beneath, breathing heavily. I ran until my lungs nearly burst, and I never went hiking alone again. Story 4. The Abandoned Hospital. A friend dared me to sneak into the abandoned hospital on the edge of town. It was notorious for urban explorers, with entire wings left untouched since the 1980s. The walls were moldy, and the air reeked of disinfectant long gone stale. As I walked the halls, I noticed gurneys still in place, for poles with cracked bags hanging. It was as if everyone had vanished in a rush. Then I heard wheels squeaking down the corridor. A gurney rolled past me with no one pushing it. I swore I saw a figure lying on it, covered in a sheet. My flashlight flickered violently. When the light came back, the sheet was on the floor at my feet, still warm as if someone had been beneath it seconds before. Story 5. The Train Yard. I was photographing old trains at night in a disused yard. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the creaks of rusted metal. I climbed into one of the cars, graffiti covering its walls. The inside smelled of rot and mildew, but also something sharper, like blood. In one corner, a pile of blankets stirred. I thought it was an animal, but then a hand reached out. A gaunt face appeared, eyes hollow and glowing faintly in the dark. The man whispered, "Don't tell them I'm here." His teeth were broken, lips cracked, but his eyes stayed locked on me. I fled, but when I looked back, he had vanished, though his whisper followed me across the entire yard. Story 6. The Burned House. There was a charred house in my neighborhood, said to have caught fire decades ago. Kids dared each other break in. One summer night, I accepted. The place was half collapsed, but I climbed inside. Blackened furniture lay scattered, walls peeling like dead skin. In one room, the floor was covered in melted dolls, their faces twisted by heat. My flashlight barely illuminated the hallway. On the wall, in soot, someone had drawn stick figures, an entire family holding hands. Above them were words scratched in ash. "We're still here." Then came the faint sound of crackling fire, though there were no flames. The heat rose around me, choking, until I stumbled outside gasping. Story 7, the quarry. We snuck into quarry after midnight, wanted to swim under the moonlight. The cliffs towered above us, jagged and unforgiving. The water was still black like glass. When we dove in, it was freezing. I swam to the center, but suddenly felt something brush my leg. At first, I thought it was just weeds. Then it wrapped around my ankle. I struggled, kicking violently, but the grip tightened. I was yanked under, my chest burning as I swallowed water. Just before blacking out, the grip released. I surfaced screaming, and my friends pulled me out. When I showed them the bruises on my ankle, hand-shaped, they never returned there again. Story 8, the church basement. We found an unlocked old church one stormy night. It was condemned, but curiosity pushed us inside. The pews were coated in dust, hymnals scattered like relics. We discovered a door leading to the basement. The staircase descended into pitch black. At the bottom, dozens of wooden chairs faced a single altar covered in melted black candles. Scratches covered the walls, words in Latin I couldn't understand. Then we heard footsteps circling us in the dark, though no one was visible. A candle suddenly lit itself, illuminating dozens of children's shoes arranged in rows. We bolted, and the door slammed behind us with a force that shook the walls. Story 9, the farmhouse. Out in the countryside, I found a decrepit farmhouse while exploring with friends. The barn had collapsed, but the house still stood. We entered through a broken window. Inside, the kitchen table was set for dinner, plates still holding moldy food. Chairs were knocked over, as if the family had left in a panic. A child's toy car sat in the doorway. Upstairs, every bedroom had identical drawings taped to the walls, a faceless man standing in fields. Some were drawn in crayon, others scratched directly into plaster. When we reached the last room, the floor was lined with salt circles. Inside one, a chair sat facing the door. On it lay a photograph of us entering the house minutes earlier. Story 10, the water tower. In our small town, the old water tower was fenced off, considered unsafe. One night, I climbed over graffiti it. The ladder groaned under my weight as I climbed. Halfway up, I noticed carvings on the metal, names, dates, even pleas for help. At the top, the hatch was open. Inside, the stale water sloshed quietly. On the curved inner wall were bloody handprints, dozens of them, smudged downward as if people had tried to climb out. The stench of rot hit me suddenly. I fled, but when I looked back at the ladder, fresh handprints glistened wetly in the moonlight, even though I had never touched the walls. Story 11, the locked greenhouse. At the edge of town, behind a crumbling estate, there was an old greenhouse padlocked for decades. One night, we broke in. Glass crunched under our feet. Inside, the plants were dead, brittle, covered in dust. But in the center, one flower bloomed, vividly red. It looked fresh, out of place, thriving despite decay. When I leaned closer, I realized it was growing from a pile of bones. The roots threaded through rib cages like veins. My stomach twisted. Suddenly, vines slithered toward me, wrapping around my wrist. I tore free, but a scratch remained that never healed properly, always burning when I passed the greenhouse. Story 12, the lock bridge. We were drinking by the old railway bridge, officially closed for safety. It was rusting, sagging, and half covered in graffiti. We dared each other to walk across. Halfway, I heard footsteps behind me. I thought it was one of my friends. But when I turned, a man in a tattered conductor's uniform stood there. His face half melted away. He raised a lantern, gesturing me forward toward the far side where the bridge had collapsed decades ago. My legs locked in terror. When I blinked, he was gone, but fresh boot prints led to the broken edge, stopping abruptly where the tracks ended in midair. Story 13, the carnival grounds. On the outskirts of the city sat the abandoned carnival. The rides rusted, paint faded, banners torn. We entered through a ripped fence one autumn night. The Ferris wheel still stood, massive and skeletal. Suddenly, it began to creak, rotating slowly though no power was connected. We froze. From the top car, I swore I saw silhouettes waving down at us. Their outlines were thin, almost skeletal, yet they swayed as if alive. Then laughter filled the air, children's voices mixed with carnival music faintly playing from broken speakers. We bolted, never daring to return. Story 14, the mine shaft. Deep in the woods, we found an old mine entrance boarded shut. We pried it open, curious. The air inside was damp and suffocating. Our flashlights illuminated endless black tunnels. We descended, following rusted tracks. Then we heard whispering echo through the cavern. At first faint, then louder, though no one was there. In one chamber, dozens of helmets were scattered, each cracked and dented. On the walls, handprints smeared and soot pointed toward a deeper tunnel. When we turned to leave, we realized our footprints had been erased. The dust was smooth, as if someone had swept them away behind us. Story 15, the theater. There was an old cinema locked for decades, scheduled for demolition. We snuck in one night, eager to explore. The lobby still smelled of popcorn faintly. Inside the auditorium, seats were torn, screen yellowed, but the projector clicked on by itself. Footage rolled, grainy and silent. On screen were images of us, entering the building moments earlier. Then the reel showed us sitting in the very seats we now occupied. The final frame was of a shadowed figure standing behind us. We bolted without looking back, and the Story 16, the morgue. The old morgue in town had been abandoned for decades. We broke in one night, daring each other to open the drawers. Dust coated everything, air heavy with rot. I pulled one open slowly, expecting nothing. Inside lay a cracked mannequin torso. But when I touched it, its eyes flicked open. The drawers around us began sliding out, banging violently. Empty at first, until one revealed a hand that twitched before curling into a fist. We ran, chased by the sound of metal slamming, until the night swallowed us outside. I still hear the drawers when I close my eyes. Story 17, the schoolhouse. In the countryside, there's a one-room schoolhouse long abandoned. We ventured in at dusk. Chalk still lined the board, faint equations scrawled decades ago. Desks were overturned, books scattered, and a strange odor lingered, sour and sweet. Then the bell tower rang, though the rope had rotted away. Children's laughter echoed, but the room was empty. Then Chalk began scratching across the board, writing, "Stay after class." The door slammed, locking us inside until dawn. When it finally opened, the writing was gone, but faint handprints covered every desk. Story 18, the motel room. There's an old roadside motel, shuttered for years. We broke into one of the rooms, peeling wallpaper hanging loose. The beds were still made. A suitcase sat in the corner, filled with clothes neatly folded, untouched by time. But in the bathroom, the mirror was shattered, shards scattered across the sink. In the glass, my reflection lingered even after I stepped away. It smiled when I didn't. We fled that room, but I swear sometimes in hotel mirrors I see the same grin waiting for me. Story 19, the lighthouse. On a rocky coast, there's an abandoned lighthouse. We trespassed one night, climbing its spiral stairs. The air smelled of salt and rust. At the top, the lantern room was shattered, glass littering the floor. But the light suddenly blazed on, sweeping across the sea. In its glow, we saw dozens of figures standing in the waves, motionless, staring back at us. The beam passed, and they vanished. The light burned our eyes until we ran, but sometimes I dream of the sea filled with those pale faces. Story 20, the sanitarium. The abandoned sanitarium had always been off-limits. We broke in anyway, wandering its endless corridors. Doors slammed behind us, echoing like gunshots. Patient files lay scattered, names crossed out violently in red ink. The walls were scratched with words, "Don't leave me here." We reached a padded cell. Inside, the padding had been ripped away, exposing claw marks through concrete. Then we heard it, sobbing low and guttural, coming from the vents. We bolted before we found who was crying. Story 21, the subway tunnels. In the city, some old subway tunnels had been sealed off for decades. We cut through a fence and ventured down. Our footsteps echoed endlessly. Graffiti covered the walls, but fresh paint still dripped, spelling names none of us knew. The air grew colder the deeper we went. At one point, we saw a train headlight rushing toward us. We screamed and dove aside, but no train passed. The light simply vanished. When we turned back, there were dozens of figures behind us, all in tattered commuter clothes, staring silently. We ran without looking back. Story 22, the mansion. A wealthy family's mansion had been abandoned after a scandal. We sneaked in, amazed at the grand staircase and dusty chandeliers. But the place felt wrong. Every mirror in the house was covered with black cloth. We pulled one down. Our reflections stared back, but they didn't move when we did. Their mouths began opening, screaming silently, as if begging us not to stay. We dropped the cloth and ran. Outside, every window reflected our faces, still trapped inside. Story 23, the playground. There's an abandoned playground near the woods. The swings rusted, the slide bent. One night, we went to film a prank video. Suddenly, the swings began moving on their own, slow at first, then violently, creaking like screams. A child's giggle echoed in the air. We froze, then noticed small handprints forming on the fogged surface of the slide. No one was there. When we left, the sound of footsteps followed us to the tree line, light quick like children chasing. Story 24, the cemetery crypt. We broke into a crypt one Halloween night. The marble door was cracked, revealing stairs downward. The air was damp and reeked of earth. Inside, coffins lined the walls. One lid was half open. We leaned closer. A voice whispered, "Close it." Suddenly, all the lids began creaking, shifting, though no one touched them. We bolted, but I swear hands reached from the dark after us. One scraped my ankle, leaving a bruise shaped like bone fingers. Story 25, the hotel kitchen. An old luxury hotel had closed decades ago. We slipped into the kitchen, pots still hanging, rusted and covered in dust. The stoves were cold. On one counter, knives were neatly lined up. Suddenly, one fell to the floor, though no one touched it. Then another slid across the counter by itself. The freezer door swung open, revealing meat hooks. On one hung a tattered suit, swaying as if freshly hung. The air turned icy. We sprinted out, chased by the sound of knives clattering onto the tiles behind us. Story 26, the library. The town's library closed after fire. We climbed through a broken window. Books lay everywhere, charred and brittle. One book sat open on a table. Its words shifted as we looked at them, rearranging themselves into our names. Then from the shelves, dozens of voices whispered at once, reciting passages we couldn't understand. The exit door slammed, trapping us until we knocked over a shelf and escaped through the window. To this day, my name still appears in burned books in my dreams. Story 27, the amusement ride. The abandoned amusement park had a ride called Tunnel of Love. We entered one of the boats, pushing it into the darkness. Halfway through, the animatronics suddenly turned on, moving in jerky, unnatural motions. Their eyes followed us. Water rippled violently, though the ride was dry for years. Then a voice whispered from the darkness, "Stay together forever." The boat rocked violently until we jumped out and ran, dripping wet despite no water being there. Story 28, the fire tower. In the woods, there's a tall fire lookout tower. We climbed it one night, the stairs groaning. The view stretched endlessly, silent. Through the trees below, we saw campfires. Figures stood around them, all facing our tower. None moved. As the wind howled, the fires vanished instantly, yet the figures still stared. We climbed down in terror, but by the time we reached the ground, the figures were gone, yet we heard breathing right behind us. Story 29, the jailhouse. The old county jail was a ruin. Cells rusted, bars bent. We wandered inside, flashlights bouncing off graffiti. In one cell, a figure sat on the cot. We thought it was a mannequin, until it raised its head. It grinned, revealing filed teeth, and whispered, "Switch places with me." The cell door slammed shut by itself. We ran, and when we looked back, every cell now had a figure staring at us through the bars. Story 30, the Graveyard Shack. In the cemetery, there's a small shack for groundskeepers. We trespassed one night, curious. Tools lay scattered, rusted by time. In the corner sat a notebook filled with names and dates. They were all people buried in the graveyard, but the last page listed our names and the current date. Suddenly, shovels clattered to the floor. The ground outside shifted, as if something clawed upward. We sprinted out, chased by the sound of earth cracking open. Story 31, the power plant. The abandoned power plant was massive, humming faintly though shut down years ago. We entered, stepping over cables and rusted machinery. Suddenly, lights flickered on, one by one, casting long shadows. The machines rumbled, vibrating the floor. On the catwalk above, we saw silhouettes watching us. They shimmered like static, glitching in and out. When the power died again, they vanished, but our phones recorded hours of distorted screaming. Story 32, the highway rest stop. There's an old rest stop closed in the 90s. We broke in, vending machines cracked, bathrooms filthy. The smell of mildew lingered. In the stalls, every mirror was smashed. One was intact, though, and reflected the room as if filled with people standing shoulder to shoulder. When we turned, the room was empty, but the mirror showed them still there, pressing closer. We shattered it, but still felt them breathing down our necks until we reached the highway. Story 33, the prison bus. We found an abandoned prison bus in the woods. Its windows were broken, seats torn. We climbed aboard. Handcuffs still hung from rails. Suddenly, doors slammed shut, trapping us inside. The air grew stifling. Chains rattled, though no one was there. Then screams filled the bus, overlapping voices begging to be released. We forced the back door open and ran. Behind us, the bus sat silent, yet the windows were fogged with handprints. Story 34, the barn. A decayed barn stood deep in the fields. We trespassed one night, flashlight shaking. The smell of hay mixed with something foul. In the loft, we found ropes hanging like nooses. Beneath them, claw marks covered floorboards. My chest tightened. Suddenly, animals screamed from the stalls below, though the barn had been empty for years. We bolted, and in the distance, we swore we saw figures swaying from the ropes. Story 35, the fairgrounds. The fairgrounds closed after an accident years ago. We sneaked in, walking among broken rides. The smell of rust filled the night air. Suddenly, the carousel lit up, spinning slowly. Music played faintly, warped and broken. The horses' eyes glowed red, and their mouths opened, groaning as if alive. We fled before it stopped, but I'll never forget the sound of hooves chasing us in the dirt.